Thank you so very much. Let me take a little time to greet and to welcome those who are joining us on the YouTube platform. So very thankful that you could be with us this evening again, of course, to share in our Bible study. And, you know, for all those who may have been invited and are on for the very first time, I really want to take the time to greet you and to welcome you to this Bible study, which, of course, is a little more than the ordinary Bible study. I like to put it that way because it tends to get a little deep. But that being said, let me welcome those who are on the YouTube platform, along with those who are on the Zoom platform. And I pray that this evening will be beneficial for us. Amen. Let me, brothers and sisters, quickly move to our lesson for today. And just permit me to share my screen with you and to find your lesson. Of course, we need to share it at this time. Of course, we move to our slideshow. Oh, yes, and we start from the beginning. And this evening, I am really blessed and challenged in the same breath because I am looking tonight at the Tower of Babel. I have left out chapter 10, which speaks to the dispersion of nations, which of course is a separate topic by itself. The dispersion of nations has to do with the ark landing upon Mount Ararat and the people descending from the ark, Ham, Shem, Japheth. And as they descended Mount Ararat, they would have separated into particular areas. And so we have what is called the dispersion of nations. And I have to look at that at another time. But I'm very sure that the topic this evening of the Tower of Babel is one that is truly interesting. If you are born Jamaican, you would have been familiar with the Rastafarian slang that all government is Babylon. In a way, he's right. They're right. But we want to really look at the true meaning. And remember, everyone, that the biblical text is written in a context. It doesn't stand in a vacuum, neither does it rest on a bed of spiritual utopia. It is literally something that was developed within a context. It was told within that context, understood within that context, and by virtue of that, as we transition and pull it from that particular epoch, that particular time of history, we cannot lose the significance of the context in which it was done. So every now and then, you'll hear me making reference to what we call extra-biblical material, material like the Babylonian epic, the Gilgamesh epic, the Enuma Elish. But I want you to remember that while reference may be made to these documents, it is not pulling from the spiritual nature of our study or for what the text means, but it is highlighting the context within which the text was written. So let's see if we can get to the Tower of Babel, the flood and beyond. And of course, you know that the term Babylon has some rich biblical uses. And so, especially in the prophetic. So we want to get into it. But before we do that, we would like to have probably a little recap. Last week, of course, was Ash Wednesday. And we did not have a Bible study per se. But I think that a recap is good. That will just get our minds back to where we ought to be. All right? And so when you look at Genesis 6-9, of course, it's the story of Noah and the flood. We know Noah to be the son of Lamech. Lamech is the 10th generation from Adam. Not only is Noah from the or the son of Lamech, 10th from Adam. He comes from the line of Seth, right? And we remember that Abel had been murdered by his brother. And by virtue of that, God opened the womb of Eve, and she gave birth to another young man and called his name Seth. And by all indications, Seth was thought of to be a godly lineage. When we look further into the life of Noah, we find that he was uniquely righteous in a totally corrupt age. How so? Because in the midst of it all, there was something in him that appealed to the holiness of God, to the mercy of God. It says that Noah found grace in the eyes of God. And so there must have been something about him that would have attracted the gaze of God, or the attention of God, in unfolding the kind of judgment that he would upon the then created world. We learn also that Noah was warned 120 years in advance of the flood. And of course, in that 120 years, or when he was warned rather, he was actually 480 years old. He was 480 years old. He never had any children until he was 500 years old. Let's look at that. He was given exact instructions regarding the flood and regarding the ark. And if we look closely, we'll recognize also that Noah warned men of the impending disaster that would come upon the earth. So we want to give a recap. Let's look further into Noah's life. Now, 1 week before the flood, God commanded Noah and his family into the ark. And we believe to some extent that, the animals were supernaturally directed. And they went in unto Noah into the ark, 2 by 2 of all flesh, wherein is the breath of life, according to Genesis 7 and verse 15. And what is of note, we cannot miss this, is that God shut the door. It was God who shut the door of the ark. And in many cases in scripture, we're going to find that God is the one that literally determines when the clock has run out. And we need to probably, in a great sense of urgency, continue to preach, to teach, to let humanity know that judgment is rarely at the door. And unless a man, or woman for that matter, is willing to surrender to the Lord through Jesus, what you find is that we are in a state of judgment already. John says that those individuals who have rejected the Lord are already condemned. But those who have accepted him, to him gave them power to become sons, daughters of God. It is God who shut the door. And I'm sure you can imagine the kind of screaming, the hysteria, the kind of fear and cutthroat methods that must have enveloped the men of the time as they sought to save their own lives. Jesus had a stern warning for the people of the end time. He said, as it was in the day of Noah, men were eating, drinking, giving in marriage, being married, and life seemed to be going on as usual. Then suddenly the flood came. One of the things that we cannot miss is that God gives man mercy. He gives him grace. But there is a time when God shuts the door. So Noah, of course, is in the ark with his family, and the floods came. We learned that Noah was 600 years old when the floods came. Therefore, his oldest son would have been 100 years old, right? We learn also that the flood increased steadily. It rained day and night for 40 days. Yes? The water covered the mountains. And one of the things that happened for the next 110 days is that the mountains remained covered. In other words, the water did not start to recede after the 40 days for 110 days, right? Now, after 221 days, the water subsided significantly and Noah was able to leave the ark. He, along with his wife, let me not say his wife, his family, they disembarked on Mount Ararat. At disembarking, Noah built an altar and he sacrificed clean animals as offerings to God. We find that in chapter 8, verse 21 to 22. And then the Lord promised never to send another universal flood. God established a bow in the heavens as a sign and a token of the covenant made between him and mankind, that another universal flood will not be used to eradicate humanity. After the flood, also, we learn that God blessed Noah. And that is written explicitly. God blessed Noah. He allowed him to bend the knee, so to speak, the Hebrew rendering. And not only did he bless Noah, but you find that he gave unto Noah the Adamic mandate, the same mandate that was given unto Adam when God had created all things. And the Lord God said to him, be fruitful, multiply, and replenish the earth. The same mandate is here given to Noah and his sons, right? And that is important, just to say that the plan of God does not stop. When we get over to Abraham, you're going to see wherein God unilaterally takes it upon himself. When he says to Abraham, I will cause your descendants. So he's not even saying to Abraham, go Abraham, be fruitful and multiply. No. He's saying, I will allow a seed to come from your own womb, or from your own lineage, rather. And from that lineage, I will cause your descendants to be as the sand on the seashore. So as we go on, we see the hand of God, literally, what can I say, reversing what humanity has caused upon the earth. And each time he puts the weight of responsibility on a human being, we tend to fail him. But the idea here is that the mandate stands, and in such a way that after a period of time, you're going to recognize that God puts the mandate on himself. He puts the mandate upon himself. And of course, he sent his son, born of a woman, born under the law, that he may redeem them who are under the law. And so the mandate to fulfill, to be fruitful rather, to multiply and to fill the earth is given to Noah. And something very interesting is here. Human government was instituted. In other words, God established a covenant with Noah. And we have what we call it the Noahic covenant, right? But within the context of the Noahic covenant, we have to remember that one of the chief reasons why God destroyed the earth before was the fact that man was violent. And every thought of his heart, according to the writer of the Genesis, was evil continually. So in this case, when God starts over, God does not just leave it to the conscience of man. God kind of gives him a law. And the law that he gives to him has to do with the sacredness of human life. We looked at that earlier on, that the problem that God had with the violence is that it disregarded the sacredness of human life. It disregarded the sacredness of the breath of God in human flesh. And so if you look at the law that is given, there's a particular stipulation, or the covenant given. There's a law that pushes itself there. And of course, the law is something that literally speaks of a standard. And more often than not, there is a penalty for breaking that standard. So we look at the sweet part of the covenant. God will not destroy the world again by water. But we also see the law portion coming up, where God says, he that shed man's blood, by man shall his blood be shed. For in the image of God created he man, and God will not hold him guiltless who shed man's blood. So capital punishment is instituted here, because based on what Noah was told, it were men who should take the law into their hands, yes, when one man is found guilty of the violence of shedding another man's blood, which of course is a euphemism for murder. So the idea here is that you have a government structure that is taking form, and it is literally at a place where it will be expanded by the time of Moses, right? But we see the first institution of human government coming. So the first human government is established. Now, I want to say, like one of the persons that I read when I looked at this topic, he said it was not only animals that were safely in the ark, it was not only Noah and his sons and families that were safe in the ark, but he said human nature was also very safe in the ark as well. And we probably have no greater example than Noah. Noah being a son of the soil, a man of the soil, a farmer, as we have interpreted from last week. He planted a vineyard as soon as he got out of the ark. And in planting the vineyard, he took off the fruit of his plantings, which of course was the wine, and he got drunk and disgracefully uncovered himself. And based on the fact that that happened, it is said that Canaan apparently did something to his grandfather. We looked at that in some detail. It's not exhausted, but in some detail. Week before last, and we looked at the different things that probably did. Of course, chief among them, some believe that it was that he mocked him, or Ham mocked his father. Others say no, it's a case whereby Canaan castrated his father. While there's another school of thought that says none of these are correct, because it is that Canaan did something that was sexually debasing with his grandfather. And based on the fact that Ham was the one who reported it and did it in a way that sought to scandalize his father, that his father cursed him. But whichever area or whichever view we take, one of the things we have to note is that the biblical text was not really trying to put too much emphasis there, but just to show a principle, of the folly to some extent of the human nature, right? Now, the other two brothers we know, Shem and Japheth, they were the two that were really very kind to their father, showed him reverence, because Noah cursed Ham and Canaan received no blessing. And Canaan, of course, was the youngest son of Ham. Now, let's look at Noah's end as we end this introductory portion. Noah lived 350 years after the flood, and he died at the age of 950. If you look at the list of the heroes of faith in Hebrews 11, we know that Noah was included in that group. Now, seeing that the destruction has taken place, Noah, his sons, they have come out of the ark. Of course, they are what we call being fruitful and replenishing the nations. We recognize that, from the old dispensation, the one that God destroyed by the flood, they're moving into a new kind of a thought. And you have to bear in mind that the descendants of Ham, Shem, and Japheth would have known the story of the flood well. They would have understood, how violent the time was before the flood. And they would have understood that it was God who destroyed the world in order to start again. And so you have to bear in mind that would kind of kind of capture their mind on the whole concept of rising up and going forward. So I want to share, I know this is also introductory to this week's lesson, the rise of civilization. We want to look at Nimrod, which of course is a pivotal figure in the Old Testament, his city and his reasoning. And I should have put his cities there because Nimrod is known to be the city builder of the Old Testament. So let's go and look at Nimrod. In Genesis 10, verse 8 to 12, we learn of the man Nimrod. Let me read from verses 8 to 12. Cush was the father of Nimrod. Nimrod became a mighty warrior on the earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. That is why it is said, like Nimrod, a mighty hunter before the Lord. The first centers of his kingdom were Babylon, Uruk, Akkad, Kalnar in Shinar. Then from that land, he went to Assyria, where he built Nineveh, Rehoboth, Ir, Calah, and Rezin, which is between Nineveh and Calah, which is the great city. You are seeing here that Nimrod is a city builder. He's a city builder. In whatever way you want to take it, he is establishing cities. Kind of gives you the idea that Nimrod is a visionary. He is an architect. He's someone who sees the vision and is able to put it together. So when you look at how the Americans approach war, after they have destroyed places like Iraq, both I think in 90, I remember the dates, 91, and later on, I think in 2013, you find that when they have destroyed the city, there are particular persons they call contractors who would go about and build these cities. And I'm sure Nimrod fits that kind of a bill, wherein he goes and he finds and founds cities. In other words, I want to believe that many of these cities being established are actually new. But after God has destroyed the entire world, him actually going forth and doing this kind of highlights Nimrod as a great builder, visionary, and strategist. Because if you look at it, brothers and sisters, you're going to recognize that Nimrod had an ideology. He had a particular kind of philosophy. And that philosophy would come out in those who would actually inhabit the cities that he built. One of the big things that we have to understand too about cities is that they do not and would not take the format of what we have today as cities. What they were actually particular areas where people had communities, right? It was seen as cities. So it's not a high-tech thing we have today. But irrespective of that, it was more of a metropolis. It was more of an area where things flourished in terms of if education back in the day, all of that flourished within the context of the city. So let's see if we can move on. Nimrod is a city builder, but he also has a gathering, an ideology that literally comes. One of the things that we can say, and I don't want to stretch the text here, but we know that cities and countries that have pivotal figures in them also tend to influence greatly the mind and the thinking of the people. And so a lot of things, if you go to Soviet Russia, you would not only see Stalin, but Lenin before him. North Korea is the same thing. They practically worship Kim Jong-il. And there was one before him. A couple of them are a part of the dynasty. But the idea is that normally fathers of a nation tend to kind of affect how the nation or the people of the nation, how they think. Now Nimrod had a gathering. You have to bear that in mind. And the Tower of Babel that we're going to study tonight begins as a venture of human autonomy. Let me put it that way. Remember what God said to Noah: be fruitful, multiply, replenish the earth or fill the earth. But the venture, the building of this tower, is actually the venture that is born not from the desire of God, but from a collection of men in council with one another. So we have to bear that in mind. And I think one of the things that the Tower of Babel does is that it shows, on the one hand, that God is not against human ingenuity. Mark you, David himself, or the writer of the Psalm declares, Psalm 139, for I am fearfully and I am wonderfully made. The idea is that as human beings, we have God's spirit in us, that which gives us life. And by virtue of that, the same mastery with which God formed man out of the dust of the earth is the same mastery that he placed upon us to do great and mighty things. But we learn, on the other hand, that God is a God of order, a God who establishes boundaries, and a God who investigates motives. All right? So let's take a while and just look at this particular situation that takes place. Now, I'm going to read it in a more fulsome way, but I want you to kind of get where we're going. So we soon get to the tower. But let's look at the idea that this venture is not so much a divine command as it is a venture coming out of the council of men. Verse 4 says, and they said, come, let us build us a city and a tower whose top may reach unto heaven, and let us make a name, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the earth. So let us make a name for ourselves. Let us establish our own credential and fame. That's the idea. So one of the things you have to get in is that after the whole violence of the antediluvian period, and that period before the deluge, you're going to find that in this post period, yes, the individuals are no less selfish as they were in the first instance, only that they have shifted to some extent the focus of their selfishness. So let us make us a name for ourselves. In other words, it's the human urge of infinite fame, achievement, self-determination, independence, and self-sufficiency. I've often warned even some of us as younger ministers, you know, we know that we are told oftentimes by the elders, when the elders see good in you, they will tell you that, you know, you are going to do well. And at the ending of the day, so if you're part of a denomination, that you're going to go far in this denomination. One of the things I warn us as young ministers about is not allowing what we see around us, or that kind of speech, to allow us to to aim more for self-aggrandizing or self-actualizing, as opposed to ensuring that we are servants of God, carrying the message of the gospel and doing the will of the Father in heaven. So we have to be so careful that in ministry, it doesn't become about self-actualization, but it becomes about fulfilling the mission that God has given unto the church. Now, the fact that these individuals had actually got to that place where they are considering building a city, you have to get it, because it's not unreasonable. It's not unreasonable. Why? Community calls for government. In other words, when you have large numbers of people, there must be standards that will serve as guidelines as to how that community will operate and function, that each individual will get the very best out of the gathering, right? But one of the things that we learn is that as they see government, oftentimes we find that God's will is discarded. I think to some extent, we have moved over into a new epoch of history where God, his church, his servants, we're not giving a whole lot of regard and credence within the context of politics here. Why? Because man has come to a place where he has established himself so firmly that he forgets that it is God who rises up one and takes down another. Humanity, especially in Jamaica land we love, we have forgotten that we belong to a God who is able to lift one up and to take another down. So at the ending of the day, while community calls for government, those who form government must come to the place that they too understand that they are but servants of a high God, servants of a higher purpose, and not there to take the best lands of Jamaica land we love, and not there to con the people for 60 years and believe that they've done a wonderful job. The idea here is that while governments are needed for communities, it is godly, God-centered, God-directed government that makes for a community that is successful. So let's look at the community understanding here. Because within the community of believers after the flood, there's a great dream for human civilization and culture. It's endless when you look at the possibilities. But one of the things that we can detect too from this community is that they were fearful. So they said, not only must we make ourselves a name, but lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the earth and have no identity. I think to some extent, that is what is being said here, right? That we shall have no identity. One of the important factors about being a child of God is understanding our unique place, standing and status in this whole scheme of things. The church of old had a knowledge, they would say that, we are not a part of the world. We are not so sure now because of what I think I like to call syncretism. Syncretism literally speaks of the mixing of religions. So while we used to say at one point, Jesus is the only way, now where it says Jesus and a few other ways. You understand? But we have compromised to some extent that we have embraced the cultures of the world. So the countercultural understanding of the old church is not the understanding of the current church, because most people believe that you have to look like the world, sound like the world, behave like the world in order to win the world. And I'm like, no, that's crazy. No man cometh unto God except his spirit draw him. And so that is why we have a watered down church to some extent, because we're allowing persons to believe that the only thing that changes when an individual gets saved is that they're going heaven and not hell. So the person doesn't change. Yes? But the idea here is that Christians must know our unique identity. And if you believe, or I believe that it's an old thing, hear what Peter says to the people of God, quoting from Deuteronomy. But you are a chosen, Exodus rather, you are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a peculiar people. And he adds that you are called out of darkness into his marvelous light. So one of the things you have to know is that while we are a part of the building of society, the divine ideal in us must remain. The divine ideal must remain. During this period of time, I must say to you that the people, it doesn't mean that they did not have a concept of God or a knowledge of God. And as I go further, you will understand, right? So it's not like that because they were pushing to build civilizations and whatnot. There was actually no concept of divine intervention in the earth. But I'll explain that as we move on, right? So the people after the flood are dwelling in their dwelling places. And a particular philosophy starts to grow. One, a philosophy that says, we don't want to be scattered in the earth. And a philosophy that says, let's make a name for ourselves. So what you're seeing here, is the people are calculating their need. They're calculating what will make this community work. And I'm putting it this way because we're so flippant sometimes. We read these stories, that we don't recognize that the same thing is playing out today. In other words, we have to literally go back to the days of Babel and live in the city, sometimes it is hard to understand. And we tend, listen carefully, many of us tend to believe that the people of the ancient world were savages and unlearned. And I vehemently disagree. These individuals lived to ages that we could only imagine. So it's in the imagination. Noah died at 950. Secondly, these individuals kept their culture alive by telling stories. Yes? When you look at Adam naming the animals, Adam didn't mix up any of them, and he gave a name to each of them. The things that we do today, we have devolved in our intelligence. Because while these individuals could actually determine particular things with what they had, we have invented computers to think for us. So over a period of time, people are going to become, excuse my expression, duncer and duncer and duncer. That's Jamaican parlance, everyone. In other words, the intelligence of people is going to go down. You may ask me why, or what evidence do I have? It is simple. It is simple. When you and I, any one of us who uses a computer, and any one of us who does any typing at all, after typing for a while and using the spell check that is in the computer, after a while our skills and our confidence at spelling is not really as high as it started out, because that part of our brain has been put to rest because the computer is actually taking over the job. All these individuals had was a brain. They had brains. And to build the pyramids, to build, as we are going to go on, towers like we're looking at today, that was no easy feat. But look at these people who calculated their need. They did not have any form of computers, right? They were able to chart a way forward. And that's why I want you to come with me to the city of Babylon. Because when we get into the plain of Shinar, I want you to see yourselves in the group as you're rebuilding. For those of us who have been to Hurricane Gilbert, probably one of the longest periods of national rebuilding that I can remember in recent history. Rebuilding, we recognize that everyone had a part to play. For those who were not integrally involved, our patience was needed. For those who were doing the electrical work and the work on the infrastructure and all of that, you know, they were hard at work, working night and day. So the idea here is that these individuals had a particular situation in front of them. And the only way we can understand is if we kind of divest ourselves of our 21st century self. They didn't have Zoom to have their meetings. They'd have to meet in squares or in places of gathering. And look at it. In the midst of them rebuilding, the imagination of the people was really very high. The people created a brand new vision of how things might be. They literally, in their own minds and hearts, created a utopia in their minds as to what the world should be. Right? No, they were given a mandate to replenish, be fruitful, fill the earth. Right? But the whole idea of having a world government, and this government appears somewhat skewed from what God would desire, literally shows that the people were very human and they were quite intelligent. Not only did they have imagination, but they had ingenuity. In a place of language and communication, all things are possible. In other words, these individuals spoke one language. I have said it over and over and over again, that many of the people we have in church are not very wise. Jesus goes over to Gadara. And when he gets to Gadara, he sees a man coming out of the tombs. This man has caused great fear among the people because he's possessed. When he sees Jesus, he recognizes him. And Jesus asks him, "Who are you?" The man said, "We are a legion, for we are many." A legion is anywhere between 4,000 and 6,000 soldiers. So a legion within the Roman army was between 4,000 and 6,000 soldiers. While it may not be that much, the use of the term legion was to show or to say to Jesus that enough are we in here, kind of a thing. A lot of us are in here. But the important thing of note in that episode is that they spoke with one voice. Even Satan, going through the book of Mark, and they say that Jesus cast out devils by the power of Beelzebub. That's the chief of the devils. Jesus says, even Beelzebub knows that a kingdom divided cannot stand. Yes? And if Satan cast out Satan, his kingdom is going to crash. That is speaking of the kingdom of darkness. Now, shift your minds to our church. And when I say our church, I don't mean temple or New Testament. I mean church in general. The amount of individuals who will refuse to take the Lord's Supper because they are in conflict with other people is astounding. The amount of choir members who, if you look at the whole spectrum of churches in Jamaica, and I've pastored a few, not talking to one another, but they're up there singing of the glory and the mercy of God. I believe to some extent that some individuals in church would go as far as, consulting the dark arts about other people. And we are the kingdom, and we are members of the kingdom who should know better. Yes? So at the ending of the day, everybody, we have to understand that the unity that these individuals actually were embracing was what made their imagination so fruitful. Yes? Because of the fact that they were united. And we continue to call on the church to not only be a uniting force for the world, but to be united within our own walls, united within our own ranks. For those who have heard me, you have heard me talk every day that the level that God has brought me to has taught me not to waste my time fighting with people in church. Ignore them, continue the journey, and ensure that at the end of the day, you complete the work that God gave to you. So the city, if you look at it, came out of their imagination and ingenuity. That's where it's coming from. So they had a discussion. Let us build this city. The city is also a quest for safety, yes, as well as a human achievement. Within the context of the city, as a people, they would be more secure and able to ensure that certain things that they loved were protected. In other words, their personal safety, their culture, their way of life, all of that, right? The earth according to the scripture of one language. So therefore, looking at what was happening in the city, the tower, yes, can be seen as an image of human pride, in the sense that it came through human ingenuity, human passion, and it was to establish what? A name for ourselves, correct? Secondly, it is a sense of boasting in human achievement, right? No, based on one commentator, he says, lurking in the background is the idea of hubris. And we know hubris speaks of pride and arrogance, unshackled pride and arrogance. People thinking of themselves as godlike. Notice how they put it. Let us make a tower with its top into heaven. And of course, Babel is seen as a triumph of human reason and human ingenuity and human imagination. So as we kind of allow you to pull that in a little bit. The need for ingenuity, nothing is wrong with that. The need for building a city, nothing is wrong with that. The issues at hand are actually the motives and the philosophy that undergirds that ingenuity and that passion. And so you're going to find, brothers and sisters, as we say to persons, even in the context of our church, is that whatever you do, and we say it is for the Lord, if it is not done within the context of love for God, within the context that we shall stand before him at the Bema seat and either be ashamed or really be honored. Without that context, then we may be at a wrong foundation. Yes, because it is important to note that the work of the Lord is not so much so for pleasing mankind, but for pleasing God, who has given us the mandate. Now, let's look at the city and its tower. And it's vitally important that we kind of understand the concept of these cities, all right? Now, I told you earlier that I'm going to read the text in a more fulsome way, that you will get it. It says, and the whole earth was of one language and of one speech. And it came to pass as they journeyed from the east, it's coming from Ararat, moving further into what we call the Fertile Crescent, that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. And they said one to another, go to, let us make brick, burn them thoroughly. And they made brick for stone, and slime had they for mortar. And they said, go to, let us build a city, and a tower, whose top may reach into heaven, or unto heaven. And let us make us a name, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth. Now, the term city again here carries the image of human community. And it doesn't mean that it's not a physical city. But what you're going to find is that the term city and the context of this particular verse that speaks of making a city is kind of highlighting human unity, a universal human unity, right? So you see to the fact that they speak to each other. This is like meeting up, even with individuals from different tribes and saying, let's build one city where all of us can live at one time, right? So you get the idea that they are seeking a sense of permanence. So they say, we don't want to be scattered across the face of the earth, right? Let me move on, because I shared with, I think I have a duplication there, but that's okay. So one of the things that you're going to learn is that as they go about building this city, they are also building a tower in the city. And some of these things are highly misunderstood by the mind of the 21st century. The whole idea of what a tower is and the whole purpose of a tower. The fact that it was reaching up to heaven does not mean that it was created that if another flood came, that it would not catch them. That's not its meaning. So we're going to look at that shortly. Now, the idea of a tower comes out, of course, of the ancient Near East here. And within the Akkad, in the Akkadian understanding of a tower, and these are early civilizations, all right? The tower was known as the Zigguratu. Zigguratu. I'm almost sure that's the pronunciation. And of course, today we call them ziggurats. And these Zigguratu were built in terraces or on stories. In other words, they actually were like blocks laid on top of each other in terms of how they were designed. So each terrace was smaller than the one on which it rested, the one below it. All right. The story finds its background roots in Babylon. The Hebrew from which we are reading situates Shinar in a plain. And from our external reading, we know that Babylon was situated on a large plain. So I want to show you what a ziggurat would look like, a tower, as we go on. But I also want to share something with you. The idea of the Tower of Babel is not only biblical. We have biblical or extra biblical evidence that there was something of such, okay? Now, when we look at the Babylonian epic of creation, tablet 6, lines 58 to 61, the following account is given there. I quote, for 1 whole year, they, speaking of the inhabitants of Babylon, molded bricks. When the second year arrived, they raised high the head of Isagila, the house whose head is raised up. That's what Isagila means. The house of Marduk, unquote, sorry. The house of Marduk, the chief Babylonian god, was known as the Isagila, the house whose head is raised up, or a tower. You get it? The house whose head is raised up, more likely the house with a very high roof, a tower, right? At the base of the structure was written, and this is coming again from the epic, the Babylonian epic, was written the inscription, and this was done by King Nabopolassar. Marduk, and Marduk, of course, was the chief god of the Babylonians. Marduk had me lay its foundation in the heart of the earth and lift its pinnacle in the sky, unquote. So we have biblical evidence and extra biblical evidence of the great Tower of Babylon. The lofty tower that was raised up from it, or from the city rack, was normally called Iteman Aki, house of the foundation of heaven and earth. Other notable ziggurats were also located in such Mesopotamian cities as Nippur, Larsa, and Sippar. All of these were located in ancient Babylon, which is modern-day Iraq. In each of these cities, they were called Zigguratu, or the Enduranki, the house of the bond between heaven and earth. So Nippur, Larsa, and Sippar, in these cities, they called their ziggurats the Duranki, right? I said Duranki, the house of the bond between heaven and earth. Now, let me just state something here. When I show you the tower, some of you would have known already because I've explained it already on this broadcast. But the tower must be seen within the context of the ancient Near East. This fellow called Jacob, when he ran from his brother Esau, and he came to Luz, which he later renamed Bethel, he took a stone for his pillow, and he laid it down. And as he laid it down, he slept, and he had a vision or a dream. He saw a ladder extending between heaven and earth. He saw angels ascending and descending on the ladder. And at the top was the great God saying to him, I am the God of Abraham, of Jacob, and of Isaac. I shouldn't say Jacob there, but the God of your fathers, of Abraham and of Isaac, because Jacob is there as well. So the idea is that when you think of the ziggurat or the tower, whatever they want to call it, the idea is that it is a connection between heaven and earth, right? So one of the things that I want to let you know is that the ladder of Jacob that he saw is actually seen within the context of a ziggurat, a pyramid, like you should be seeing on your screen now. And of course, there is a step that goes up that particular building. That is what is called a ladder. Within the context of the ancient Near Eastern culture, a ladder is not two pieces of sticks you put together and get some smaller sticks and nail them in the middle, lay it against your house and climb up on top of it. No, the idea of a ladder literally gives you the idea of ascending. So it's the shape of it that reference is being made to. Our ladders that we put on our houses are modern inventions within the context of how we know it to be. All right? So what you see here, as was described before, is a ziggurat. This would have constituted what they called a tower, right? So the ziggurat, if you look at it, it has a base, and please follow my pointer. It has a base, and like the description before, each subsequent story is actually smaller than the base on which it sits. So this one, of course, smaller, and you can see smaller. On the top here, what is usually here is a place where the high priest would go. And he would go there to meet with whichever God came down. Now, to those individuals who believe that this tower was being built to escape the flood, you misunderstand greatly. The idea is not that men would come up to meet with God, so to speak, or to escape the flood. It's the idea that God would meet with them here because he's coming down from the heavens. So it was a place that they are putting forward as a ground of mediation. So the high priest would go up here to meet the God, and the God would come down here to meet with him. In other words, they were looking for their own substitute of a mediator. And one of the big things about the Babylon situation that a lot of people do not get is that they wanted to create their religion on their own terms. So normally, God is the one who gives instruction as to what you must do, what you must observe, what is salvation, what is mercy, and what is judgment. These individuals at Babel were taking it on themselves to create their own religion on their own terms. We don't want to be scattered. We want to make a name for ourselves. And because of that, we're going to stay right here. And God are the gods better meet with us up here, so because I we are making meeting. If you don't want to come, that's a general idea. That's the general idea. So Jacob's ladder would have been, and I'll show you some steps that go up to here, and he would have seen angels walking up and down on it and coming in and out. And of course, he would have seen God at the top, somewhere up here. So in the mind of Jacob, when he lay down to sleep, probably, more than likely, he saw something like this. And one of the things that I made clear also to those whom I've explained this before, is that this temple, because this is the temple or the tower, is at the middle of the city. So I don't want you to believe that it is the tower that is the city. Look along the sides here, you'd see the city walls, if you follow my tracing. So the city was enclosed, and the temple was built in the middle of the city. And I said to individuals years ago that before there was politics, there was religion. It is within this particular understanding that people would carry their goods to the temple for the priest to bless. All kinds of commerce began right here. And you would see it even when God commanded Moses. There is an offering that is to be taken. Later on, there's a temple tax that is to be taken. The idea is that civilization, believe it yes or no, owes a debt of gratitude to religion. Because before there was civilization, as we know it, there was religion. Let me see if I can give you another view of this thing here. So here is what you're seeing here is the combination of a temple tower with a city. And this was not something that was scarce. It was typical. It was normal, right? No, in the holy cities of Mesopotamia, the temple or the tower, they were the most impressive buildings. And the tower that arose from the building, or the temple, sorry, were the most impressive buildings. And the tower that arose from the building was its supreme glory and splendor. The ancient historian Herodotus, he saw two ziggurats, two temples with towers, built by one, Nabopolassar, who was, of course, the leader of Babylon, 625 to 605 BC, and our own Nebuchadnezzar II, who led Babylon from 605 to 592 BC. So these two men built ziggurats. But I want you to look at this. The ziggurat would actually be like here in the temple. This one is represented by Babylon because the Euphrates is running beside it. So I kind of believe this is what the artist was trying to do, because a big part of the Persians conquering Babylon had to do with the Euphrates River. No, this would be the most glorious building in all the city. And if you notice, the tower up here is high. This would actually be what Jacob would call the ladder. This right here, it is what they would walk on to reach to the top. And based on their reckoning of how high the thing was, they would use the euphemism that its top is in the heavens. In other words, that's the highest building I've ever seen. That's simply what they were saying, right? So it's almost a little hyperbole, but in essence, it is conveying the idea. So the city, if you look, you would see the city around, and the temple was at the center of the city. And it really stood for the fact that the people of old, they really considered their religion, right? And religion was the center of everything. I have a clearer picture here that may give you a kind of a prettier kind of a look, a clearer look. So again, here is, oh my Lord, let me go back. Here is what we call the ladder. Here is another ladder, right? And this would be the temple, and up here would be the tower portion, right? This would be the place that they spent the most money on. When you look at it, you see the city around it. So that is the idea that you need to get. This is what they're building. Let's build a city. And this we're going to build in the middle of the city to ensure that it reaches up into the heavens, all right? So Herodotus more than likely saw something like that, right? And the tower was built on ruins of previous ziggurats. Now, the ones that Herodotus saw had the following description. They're about 7 stories high, at least 7 stories high. And you saw how they're organized. Each subsequent layer is smaller than the other. So it looks like a pyramid. And the height was estimated to be 300 feet. The dwelling of Marduk was normally erected on the 7th story, which is the dwelling of their chief god. So here is where, if this was the one that Herodotus saw, this would have been where Marduk's dwelling is, right on top here, right? And in here would be a little bed, a little table, and of course a little food for the god, in case he came down, wanted to spend the night, and was hungry, right? Now, let me move on. So the Tower of Babel, as we're looking at it, is representing the dream of human civilization, a human unity without divine intervention. It is an attempt at self-governance. It is to institute utopia through the expression of togetherness, language, invention, social cooperation, and creative culture technology, or creativity, culture, and technology. But in the eyes of God, it was the apex of human rebellion and self-rule. That great tower, that apparently and seemingly is being built for the glory of God. It appears that the motivations were really not for the glory of God. And so it came under divine scrutiny. Came under divine, let me hope I have a little time. I should have a little time left. And we want to ensure that we end in good time. So we're about 5 minutes. I do not want to, let me just get the divine scrutiny portion finished, and we can stop there for this week. Now the tower that they are building, so you have to bear in mind they have begun to build it, comes under God's inspection, right? Verse 5 says, and the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the children of men built. And the Lord said, behold, the people are one, and they have all one language, and this they begin to do. And now nothing will be withheld from them, which they have imagined to do. You know, it is important that we recognize that as a governing principle of life, unity and oneness of vision really means strength. Whether it is for good or whether it is for evil, it will produce results. It will produce results. And so it is important that the motivations behind unity are the right motivations. All right? If we unite people and lead them in the wrong path, then you can just imagine the damage that that does. That's why when God inspects it, God has the final say. No, when you look at it, God's perspective comes into view. God disapproves of dreams of limitless human achievement. And let me qualify that. God is the architect of boundaries. The first boundary, was not given to Adam. It was given to his creation. Look at it. Let's read from the book of Job. Job 14, verse 5. Speaking of man's frailty. Remember, Job starts, chapter 14 rather, by saying that man that is born of a woman is of a few days and full of trouble. He says, man's days are determined. The number of his months are with thee. You have appointed his boundary that he cannot pass. That's Job 14:5. When you look at Job 2 and verse 6, the Lord said unto Satan, behold, he is in thine hand, but save his life. The idea coming out of this text is that God sets even boundaries on our suffering. Even on our suffering, God sets boundaries. Let's look at Proverbs 8 and verse 29. And I have it in both the KJV and the NIV just for the sake of clarity, right? Hear what it says. When he gave to the sea his decree that the waters should pass not or should not pass his commandment. When he appointed the foundations of the earth. That's Proverbs 8:29. That's a King James version of it. Here's the NIV version. When he gave the sea its boundary, so the waters would not overstep his command, and when he marked out the foundations of the earth. My God, God is a God of boundaries. Let's see, just to ensure that you have a good understanding, let me read from Job 38, verse 8 and 11, and we may have to stop here this evening. When God calls Job into account and asked him where he was when he, God, laid the foundations of the earth, when he said to Job, you are so proud in yourself and you don't even understand the kind of thing that you're a part of. Hear what God says to Job. Who shut up the sea behind doors when it burst forth from the womb? When I made the clouds its garment and wrapped it in thick darkness, when I fixed limits for it and set its doors and bars in place, when I said, this far you may come and no further. Here is where your proud waves halt. That's Job 38, verses 8 to 11. God is a God of boundaries. A God of boundaries. If you look at the text that was read in verse 5, it was in verse 5, I think, where God says, let us go down, verse 3 going down into 5. You find a few things. One, you find the dream of humanity, right? Let's go and see the city that they have built. But while on the one hand, it seems a great dream for humanity, on the other hand, it's idolatry in another form, even as God is investigating. Why? When you look at the idea, it has to do with people and security, right? And this has become the basis of security for humanity, the city and the tower. And what becomes people's security becomes the object of their ultimate obedience or allegiance. Hear what one man says. Implicitly, the Tower of Babel was a substitute deity, a substitute God. It carries the same divine scorn that idolatry carries everywhere in the Bible. So let's stop there for this evening. We pick up next week at the divine verdict. Let me, at this time, brothers and sisters, thank those who have joined us on the YouTube platform. I want to thank you for your presence. And it is always a joy having you, sharing with us in this, our Bible study. You've recognized by now, it's a Bible study that goes a little deeper than so. But what we want to ask of you is to invite someone along, share our page, leave a like, of course. We ask you also to click the little bell icon. Whenever we have anything going, it will alert you. And also, we're trying to get the page to 1,000 likes at least. We need to get it there. We're not there yet. We're about 200 and odd. So we're asking you just to let your friends know, let your church brothers and sisters know that they can visit our page, leave a like as we seek to get up to that 1,000 marker. Let me, brothers and sisters, behalf of the leadership of the Temple Hall Church, thank you for joining us. And it is my desire that you will join us again next week. Let me pray that you have received a blessing somewhere in this, and that the mind has become a little more fruitful as we seek to delve deeper. God bless you. Please be safe. And until